All right, I'm going to take a look at some video clips from the Malchut Conference in 2022. This is a conference put on by First Fruits of Zion for their most ardent supporters, Torah Club leaders. It used to be available to the public. Subsequent to my seminar, it was moved behind the paywall. I don't know if they always intended to do that or not. Doesn't matter. Unfortunately, you can't access it now. I recorded these clips when they were available, and we're going to take a look at them. These are the leaders of First Fruits of Zion. This is Daniel Lancaster, one of the chief authors of Torah Club materials, the author of Restoration, the author of What About the Sacrifices, right? I've interacted with his material quite a bit. We use these clips in my seminar in the fall of 2023. I'm going to break them out and talk about each one of them in its own individual video to make them nice and short and digestible. But if you've never watched the seminar, that is where we lay out the entirety of the case, right, against the teachings of First Fruits of Zion, make the case that they are heretical, that it is cult-like, etc. So go ahead and take a look at that on my channel. That is the deep teaching, the going all the way into all of the things that they're teaching. Here's just one example of the kind of troubling thought processes that are happening here. So let's take a look at what he has to say.
I mean, as this evangelical, I did not understand the full scope of the gospel message. That is for sure, especially as it pertained to Israel. But I would say as it pertained to any human being, but especially as it pertained to Israel. Instead, I learned to divide the world, as I'm sure many of you did, into two types of people, the saved and the unsaved, right? Those who have been born again by accepting Jesus into their hearts for a personal relationship went into a category we called the saved, that is the Christians, and those without Jesus, the unsaved, the non-Christians. And those, so the onus was upon those of us who are the saved, that we have a responsibility and a mission to save the unsaved and persuade them to become Christians, which seems reasonable. In this respect, this approach to evangelism, you know, from what I'm looking at now, it was a little naive and largely a misunderstanding of the gospel message. I mean, this is just not what Yeshua taught. We thought the gospel message was believe in Jesus so that you will go to heaven when you die. I mean, really, that was it. So believing the right things about Jesus, that was our sacrament. Having the right things in your head about Jesus, that was the thing that saved you. But that's not what Yeshua said, and that's not what he taught. When I started to learn the New Testament from a Jewish perspective and to study the teachings of the Jewish Yeshua, I discovered a totally different gospel message. In fact, it used to trouble me that he never said anything about becoming Christians. Didn't it trouble anyone else? I mean, it really troubled me. I mean, I'm talking about as a teenager reading his. I remember throwing the Bible across the room, you know, because it just seemed like everything contradicted, everything in the Bible contradicted everything I was learning in church. It's very.
All right, so here's the quote. We're going to break it down. But did you notice, did you hear, maybe the audio is not good enough for you to hear, the audience laughed, right, when he talked about evangelism, about the lost hearing the gospel from the saved. They laughed at that, and they laughed at the idea of becoming a Christian. That's funny to the most ardent supporters of First Fruits of Zion. They're key contributors, they're financial supporters. They're laughing at that idea. And I make note of this in the seminar. Some of the most disturbing parts of these videos is when the audience laughs, what they think is funny. It's frightening. All right, so he was raised as a fundamentalist. He calls himself an evangelical, but he was definitely raised in a fundamentalist Baptist church. Unfortunately, yes, I'm a Baptist, and we have fundamentalist Baptist folks that whose version of the gospel is not all that it should be. So I don't disagree that he misunderstood the full message of the gospel when he was a young person. But this wasn't the problem. All right, dividing the world into the saved and the unsaved, the redeemed and the lost, is not the problem. He says this is not what Jesus taught. It's exactly what Jesus taught. Jesus said, John 14, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. Jesus is the one talking about separating the wheat from the tares, the sheep from the goats. Jesus is the one that this message revolves around. And for you to say that this was a little naive and largely misunderstanding of the gospel, that Jesus didn't teach this, I'm already terrified of where you're going, right? What is your hermeneutic? What is your way of studying the gospels that you think Jesus did not believe and teach that the world is separated into the saved and the lost? What categories do you think? So yeah, the first part of this, troubling. And then, of course, so it's just not what Yeshua taught. We thought the gospel message was believe in Jesus so you will go to heaven when you die. Again, he was raised with a deficient understanding of the gospel, but that is part of it, right? The first part of John 14, before Jesus' famous quote, he says, in my Father's house, right? He's talking about when we die, being with God in heaven. That's not what it's only about. And if that was your criticism, Daniel Lancaster, if you were simply saying that we really actually need to also focus on discipleship, then you are correct. And that is what the vast majority of the church teaches today and has always taught. That it's not just about going to heaven when you die. It's about living for the kingdom. It's about living like Christ here and now. Sacrificing, serving, loving. So if that's the message, I'm all for it, because that's exactly what the church has taught and should be teaching. But that's not where you're going, is it? Now, we'll get back to this thought in a subsequent video, but he says believing the right thing about Jesus. And this is going to be a key for him, that he is downplaying the idea that you need to believe the right things about Jesus, about who he is and what he has accomplished. Now, again, I didn't know this at the time when the seminar debuted in September of 2023, because I had not yet seen his teachings. I didn't find them until 2024, where he basically denies the Trinity. So now I understand why he doesn't want believing the right things about Jesus to be central to what it means to be a follower of Jesus, because he doesn't believe in the Trinity. Doesn't believe that Jesus was a person. He believes he was just an avatar of God. Again, I made videos and on my blog have the quotes from his teaching that show that that's what Daniel Lancaster believes. All right, but that's not what Yeshua said, and that's not what he taught. He didn't say and he didn't teach, believe in me and you will be saved. I don't know how to respond to that, because you're denying what's right there in the Gospels. I don't even need to go to Paul, which again would back that up. It's right there in the Gospels. And he says, here's where I learned something different. Okay, I started to learn the New Testament from a Jewish perspective, the study of the teachings of the Jewish Yeshua. I discovered a totally different gospel message. Now again, in subsequent videos, we'll see some more definition of what they believe the gospel to be. But they are rejecting the idea that believing the right things about Jesus, in other words, believing in Jesus in an orthodox, in a historically correct way, would take you from being lost to being redeemed and saved, right? He's rejecting that. I don't care what you're replacing it with. I don't care what your new vision is, because you're leaving. You're leaving the faith of our ancestors. For 2,000 years, you're walking away from it. And then the end of the quote where the people are laughing. This is just ridiculous, right? It used to trouble me. He never said anything about becoming Christians. Daniel Lancaster, come on. You can't do better than this? Of course he didn't say anything about becoming Christians because the term Christ follower, Christians, was not coined and used of Jesus' disciples until after his ascension. So why would he use a term that people hadn't used yet? That doesn't make any sense. So it's troubling to you, right? That's just a cheap joke. It's a cheap line designed to get a laugh from the crowd at the expense of the fools that think they ought to be Christians. And if that's not troubling, if that doesn't scare you, right? Do not let this organization in your church. Do not join one of these Torah Club groups because this is the attitude of its leaders, that you should be laughed at for becoming a Christian because Jesus didn't want you to be one. And then the end of it, wow. I remember throwing the Bible across the room because it just seemed like it contradicted everything I was learning in church. Then my goodness, the church you grew up in, how messed up was it? One of two things is true, right? On a sliding scale, these two things are true. He had a very deficient upbringing with respect to the gospel and what the Bible teaches. And two, he was learning new things on top of that. New things that were not biblically sound, exegetically sound. So much so that it infuriated him. And so, okay, this is the first video. I'm going to make a short one for each of these so that you can share these, so that you can talk about them briefly. But like I said, these are the leaders of the organization. We're not picking on some flunky, some low-level Star Trek red shirt kind of person that's just, not central to the plot. These are the leaders. This is what they teach their own most dedicated followers. And you ought to know that.